Now, in 1814, the British are going to undertake their own offensive campaign against the Americans in the War of 1812. The reason they do this is that in April of 1814, Napoleon had abdicated in Europe. He'd then been exiled on Elba, and now the British can devote all of their military resources to the War of 1812 and to defeating the Americans. So they plan a three-pronged attack. They are going to hit America from the north, coming down into New York, hitting Lake Champlain. That's the main assault. They are going to, at the same time, mount a diversionary campaign in the Chesapeake Bay, going for the really inconsequential, from a strategic point of view, capital of the Americas, Washington, D.C. And then they're going to hit in the south the great port city of New Orleans, which would give them access to the Mississippi River and the Mississippi River Valley. All right. Now, the main assault is the one coming down from Canada into New York into Lake Champlain. And this was the goal here was to divide the United States in half, to sever New England from the rest of the United States. A similar goal had been implemented or attempted by the British in the American Revolutionary War. The reason for the desire to cut off New England from America in 1814 was because in New England, that was the epicenter of resistance to Madison's war. And the reason why you had so much widespread and so much intense opposition to the War of 1812 in New England was because New Englanders were the people that were involved in trade with Britain. And this war was really interrupting their business. And they were trying to do everything they could to undermine the war effort and to undermine President Madison. And the British thought this is a great opportunity for us to capitalize on this discontent within the United States and really use it to our advantage. Okay, so they're sending about 15,000 troops down into Lake Champlain region, but it comes down to a decisive naval victory, and the Americans win a big victory in Lake Champlain at Plattsburgh Bay. And that really shuts down the northern invasion of the British, and they have to withdraw back into Canada. And it's a failure for them. Now, their campaign in the Chesapeake region is a little more successful. They don't really encounter a lot of opposition moving against Washington, D.C. The United States Army is encamped outside the city. President Madison is with them. In the city, in the White House, is his wife, Dolly Madison. She is able to get a number of important items out of the White House just very shortly before the British come into the building and occupy it and then burn it down. And she's able to escape and save some important items from the White House. Okay, from D.C. they move up towards Baltimore, a bigger city, a more important city from a commercial point of view at that time. And they are bombarding heavily Fort McHenry on September 13th and 14th. And the American garrison there is just getting battered brutally by the cannon fire. And on the morning of September 14th, Francis Scott Key wakes up, looks out of his window, and sees the American flag is still flying over Fort McHenry. And he's inspired by this, and he writes the Star-Spangled Banner to celebrate it, which becomes the national anthem eventually. Now, the third attack at New Orleans goes forward in January of 1815, January 8th of 1815. And Andrew Jackson has moved over from West Florida, and his victories against the Creek Nation. He's brought with him 4,700 soldiers, American soldiers, and they face off against 5,000 British soldiers and defeat them decisively in a tremendous victory outside of New Orleans, defending that city for the Americans and defending that newly acquired Louisiana territory, which had been bought, of course, by Thomas Jefferson from Napoleon. Now, ironically, that Battle of New Orleans, that final decisive battle, came a couple of weeks after a peace had been negotiated between the British and the Americans at Ghent in Belgium. Okay, so on Christmas Eve, 1814, the Americans and the British had come to an agreement regarding a ceasefire into peace, and what they agreed on was to return to the status quo before the war started. All right. And really, the issue of impressment, one of the major causes of the war, was not even mentioned. So you wonder, well, what made this war important then? What did the Americans get out of it? They didn't get any land out of it. They didn't get any economic benefits out of it. They didn't even get any specific recognition of, the injustice of impressment or the seizure of any cargo or anything like that that may have occurred. What they did get, however, right, was survival. And the whole negotiated peace was a recognition that the United States was a sovereign nation and was going to remain an independent and sovereign nation and not be reconquered by the British and brought back into their empire. Okay? And henceforth, from 1812, there's not really any more a question of whether America is going to survive, of whether this new republic is going to survive, right? That question had dominated that period of the early republic and caused a lot of instability. That question is now resolved. The republic will survive, and it will be, rather than the primary enemy of Britain, it's going to be its major ally henceforth in the 19th and the 20th centuries, all right? And, that happens just in time for the British to regroup and turn their attention back to Napoleon's final assault, his escape from Elba back into France, where they face off against Napoleon at Waterloo in Belgium in June of 1815, finally bringing an end to the whole Napoleonic era. All right? Very good.